This is awesome. Thank you. Couple things, if you'll reach real quick and turn your cell phones to silent. And Max will be taping the program today, so you'll be able, if you missed part of it or didn't understand something, you'll be able to go back and watch it. Turn this off, okay. I'd like to thank 3 of our corporate sponsors before we start. TNS Auto, Westlake Royal Building Products, and Chilhowie Fence Supply. They have sponsored us this year and helped keep the lights on and the air conditioning going, so we appreciate that. This wild man here, I met him a few years ago when I was at the courthouse doing research.
And she kept coming back.
Yeah, really. Don't ever try to do a college paper in like 3 months when the only time you can get to the courthouse is the time the school's out in Saltville. Till I got here, they ran me out at 5 every day, but I got it done, so anyway. But this is Dan Kegley. He said he was born in Roanoke, grew up in Winfield, spent time at Emory and Henry, where his dad was working. He was in newspaper business for 23 years, and I found old newspapers upstairs with his byline under several articles. He started working at the courthouse in 2012. I can't read my name. Anyway, he was president of the Archaeological Society of Virginia, and in 2013, he was a member of the Holston River Master Naturalist Program.
The part she couldn't read was that I retired this past winter.
Now he's had time to do all his research. I asked him when he got interested in Bigfoot, and he said when he was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. And in 2000, he got online and learned about the Field Researchers Organization. And yesterday, when they set that thing up, I was like, oh my Lord. I mean, you hear 7 or 8 feet, but it doesn't click into you. And Sarah put that together. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan. If you have any questions at the end, I'm sure he'll be glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Is that your mic?
It is. Can you hear me?
It's not as loud as her mic was.
But it sounds great to me.
All right, y'all can hear it? All right.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Maybe pull it up closer.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can't hear it.
How's that? Any different?
If you can't hear him, tell him.
You got a voice for newspaper.
You go ahead and use that.
And a face for radio.
You go ahead and use both of them at the same time. See
He sees that.
Let's see how this works. The coin of phrase, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
All right, we'll go with that. Thank you one and all for being here. I know some have come from some little bit of a distance, and I really appreciate the turnout. I want to acknowledge my wife, Sarah. She is the projectionist today. She has been my editor, my coach, and she's the creator of that. We haven't named it. But he has stood in our kitchen for the last week and a half. Didn't see him out of the house. I think he seems to be pretty sociable. A lot of people have had their pictures made, so please step over and feel free to do that. I don't think there's anything else to cover. Do not let me forget, at the end, I have a handout of suggested readings if you're interested in this, and you don't already know more than I do, like John Paul there does. Feel free to pick up one of these and go home and do your own research. And so I'll just start by saying Sasquatch is real. Bigfoot is real. It's a cultural phenomenon. T-shirts, toys, movies, stickers on cars, books. You can even get Sasquatch soda. He's on YouTube, TV shows. Bigfoot is hip. Lots of people are making a lot of money on Bigfoot. And all that's based on a tall, hairy beast said to haunt forests across the U.S. My goal here is not to convince you that Bigfoot exists, but to show you some of the evidence. I'll talk a little bit about how that evidence is consistent across reports. I'll talk a little bit about science, about reports in our region, the kinds of evidence we have, the best research taking place, and where we are in the process of documenting the species. My wife Sarah tells me a good presentation has 3 points, but I've blown that. I just outlined 6. But I think you'll see how they can be combined, so maybe there is just 3. First Nations all speak of not a beast, but a brother in the woods, or of a supernatural being with meaning, like the white buffalo. They depicted Bigfoot in rock art and totem poles and masks long before primates on other continents were known to them. Pre-contact carvings clearly depict primate faces, many of them with protruding circled lips as formed when hooting. Those depicted a creature known to them by no available means other than direct experience. California anthropologist Alfred Kroeber spent decades studying the folklore of the Karok and Yurok Indians and concluded they expressed the idea of an ancient pre-human but parallel race. According to researcher Lauren Coleman, Kroeber's far-reaching influence led anthropologists to treat Sasquatch reports as mere folklore. Bigfoot resonates within us, touching us in ways perhaps no other idea ever has. It's enough to make us skip a Sunday afternoon nap to sit in a museum and talk about it. But is Bigfoot only a cultural phenomenon? The product of a deep and collective unconscious that has animated an idea as universal as Dollar General? If so, that in itself is worthy of study, and papers have been published ascribing Bigfoot to psychological workings and failures of the human mind. Papers that were written, no doubt, without the authors ever having closely considered the growing mountain of evidence, so circumstantial though it be. But how is it that thousands of people independently describe seeing the same thing in detail, whose characteristics, when statistically analyzed, form bell-shaped curves, as found by Dr. Henner Fahrenbach, when fictitious data does not show so normal a distribution? Such similarity today could be explained by the explosion of accounts on social media. Well, what about those accounts from 1980 and before that all describe the same thing, and those people now still unfamiliar with Bigfoot? There are folks who aren't online, but even so, their reports bear the same striking similarities to the ones who've gone before. When people can't often identify the criminal in a police station lineup, how can they agree to the point of independently describing in detail the same beast? Height, weight, head shape, arm and leg length, hair or fur color and length, the shape of the nose, the walk, the sounds, the behaviors? Is it an idea akin to an instinct, a shared memory of a being encountered early in our development as a species, or just a cautionary tale that kept children close to the fire at night? Back to the police station lineup. Are we convicting a creature of being Bigfoot when in fact it was a bear or a stump or a cow that we saw? Are thousands of people simply pulling our leg with stories of encounters and sightings of what they sometimes say was Bigfoot and other times cannot name what they saw? Are they all attention starved, looking for Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame? Are fun-loving people stomping around the leaving tracks with oversized prosthetic rubber or wooden feet to fool the rest of us, even in terrain so inaccessible that people seldom cross it? Are they spending hours on computers faking all those photos and videos? Are lifelong skilled hunters leaving the woods, hanging up their rifles and never going back after seeing Bigfoot and experiencing PTSD because they merely think they saw something or imagined some frightening beast? Why do witnesses so often say they wish they had never seen what they saw because it disturbed them so much? It's confusing, but here's help. Parsimony in science is a reductive view that says the simplest hypothesis is most likely the correct one, or most likely to be refined to reflect some fact. It's also known as Occam's razor. We avoid explaining things by invoking causes that we do not understand. The parsimonious explanation of all the things we've just looked at is that we're talking about a biological species. More narrowly, a higher primate, a cousin of gorillas and orangutans, and therefore of us. Researcher Matt Pruitt writes, Sasquatches are rare biological animals finding refuge in the vast forested habitats of North America. The sheer number of people who claim to have observed these creatures cannot all be lying, hallucinating, or misidentifying other creatures. The evidence supports the physical existence of these creatures. Institutions ignore this phenomenon because they're trapped inside an ossified paradigm. That will come back later. That doesn't allow for the possibility that Sasquatch might exist. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, the wood ape, it has a PR problem. It's been popularly labeled a monster, a powerful and indelible description. If I ask you what people you have heard called monsters, someone or more than one person just came into your mind along with your unfavorable opinion of them. Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson, any number of politicians, oh, there's none. John Duncan, Simon Cowell before he saw him. There is a perception among many uninitiated that there is or was only one Bigfoot. In that frame of mind, we don't automatically think there must be a reproducing population. There's also the idea that the monster has only been around since the 1960s, the ultimate flower child. We have a tremendous body of circumstantial evidence that, as physical anthropologist Dr. Jeff Meldrum of Idaho State University cautiously says, the evidence supports accepting that a bipedal ape on two legs like us is out there awaiting scientific documentation. The evidence is gathered mainly by dedicated lay researchers who build a convincing case that makes Bigfoot look awfully guilty of existing. What is the evidence? Most of it comprises thousands of reports and testimony about sightings and other encounters and old oral traditions. Early settlers told of wild men living in sections of the mountains where, consequently, they did not venture. One of the earliest recorded encounters with a creature that was possibly a Bigfoot occurred in 1810. Researcher Peter Byrne notes that in Wyoming, explorer David Thompson reported 14-inch long footprints in the snow that were 8 inches wide. Thompson believed the footprints belonged to a large naked animal, which he assumed was a bear, although he seems to have doubted his own assessment. Another of the famous early encounters occurred in 1811 in Missouri. The explorer Zebulon Pike and his team reported seeing a hairy wild man in the woods. Closer to home, a Bigfoot sighting occurred in Washington County, Virginia. Historian Bud Phillips wrote for the Bristol Herald-Courier, March 3rd, 2013. Most informants, and there were many, agreed that he suddenly appeared soon after the close of the Civil War along the old Jonesboro Road not far from Abingdon. Residents began to find partially eaten livestock on their farm. A man plowing his field at the base of the mountain saw one of his goats fleeing, a human-like creature with arms almost as long as his body. Once caught, the goat was tucked under his arm and carried off into the woods. An old lady living alone at the foot of this mountain heard a disturbance in her chicken house one night. She grabbed a light and a rifle and was confronted by a large monster emerging from the chicken house carrying several chickens, causing her to faint. That next day, she packed up and moved to the home of the sun. It wasn't until the lowland and mountain gorillas themselves for years seen as myths were scientifically cataloged in the mid-1800s, that late, that Bigfoot was described as ape-like using the new term of reference. Researcher Coleman wrote, "The record of gorillas in America begins in 1869 with a newspaper story headline, 'A Gorilla in Ohio.' It told of a hairy creature haunting the woods that had jumped on a man riding in a carriage. The man's daughter, who was also in the carriage, threw a stone at the animal and it departed." In Kansas, more than 60 people saw a wild man or gorilla that cannot be caught and nobody is willing to shoot it, reported the Osage City newspaper. The debate of the day was whether it was of the human family or not. Coleman noted an early gorilla report came from California gold hunters who observed 2 gorillas in the mountains. The tracks discovered were like a man's, but of immense size. The creature was described as stocky, a little over 5 feet tall, with a head that seemed small for its body. But the term wild man still appeared in newspaper accounts, one from our area. An article in the Bucks County, Pennsylvania Gazette carried the date line, Pulaski County, Virginia, May 1883. A ferocious wild man is reported to be roaming in the woods of Pulaski County and making attacks upon people he encounters. He is said to be fully 6 feet tall, very muscular, and entirely naked with long matted hair and beard. He has been pursued by parties, but he was too fleet of foot for them. A man found beaten to death in the woods is believed to have been killed by him. And just this summer, a lady told me her late husband knew a state trooper who had a sighting in Thompson Valley near Tazewell. He reported to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or BFRO, on June 20, 2014. Me and my son were cutting hay near Route 16. The field is half surrounded by woods and near the Clinch Mountains. I saw something real dark or black and tall and slim with long legs running on an angle away and down the hill real fast. It was blackish in color, and the 3 steps I plainly saw it make was the distance between 3 fence posts. We put our posts around 10 feet apart, so that would make it about 25 to 30 feet in 3 steps. It was around 100 yards away. My 17-year-old son is 6 feet 2, and it was much taller than him. My friend and fellow investigator Charles Kimbrough wrote a report that, with the farmer's account, is among those in the BFRO database. He said its head was much closer to the tree limbs than his son's head. This entire southwestern Virginia area is a real hotspot for Bigfoot sightings. A man fishing from the bank of Hovering Mother Lake below Route 16 reported hearing a commotion across the lake and seeing a large bipedal creature emerging from the brush and doing something at the water's edge, then rising and returning the way it had come. In 2018, 3 investigators of BFRO on a private investigation in Hungry Mother State Park saw a Bigfoot. Investigator Lori Wade told me in July that as the group moved from the boat dock area along the lake trail, they heard sounds on the slopes above them. We felt like we were being paralleled, she said, meaning that whatever was up there was moving apace with them, keeping up with them, but at a distance. Above her, she saw something move from tree to tree, swinging its arms. She called to investigator Jeff Carpenter, who was behind her, and he was startled to hear that she had seen the same thing he'd seen. Momentarily, Rick Rellis, who was ahead of the group, returned to say he'd seen something up there moving among the trees, and he also talked about it swinging its arms. Jeff Carpenter made the sketch on the upper left of the creature, then found a witness's sketch in a book by Lyle Blackburn from another encounter that closely resembled what he'd seen. Carpenter told me when he first saw it, he thought it was a burned stump about 3/4 of the way to the top of the ridge. And that's when I see its arm come out in the moonlight at a leg, and it takes off in this bent over squat movement over the ridge and out of sight. He told me that he saw what he thought was a blackened stump here, but then it got up and ran, as he said, like a baseball pound catcher will jump up from a squat and be running. And then disappeared over this part of the ridge. Jeff also sketched his first sighting on a North Carolina road in 2015 as he slowed to look at a coyote. And then he saw the creature over an embankment behind the guardrail. Artist and Bigfoot researcher Sheila Johnson painted what he saw. In 2021, Sabrina Morrison made the Bluefield Daily Telegraph after recording from her porch unrecognized howls in the woods around her home. What's happened to our sound?
Hold on.
Nothing like a little pressure, is it? Let's see if this is going to sleep.
That's coming off my computer.
Okay, this is awake, maybe go down.
Oh, was he asleep?
I think it was.
Sorry about that, folks. Hold on. Is it under headphones?
Yeah, that'll work. Greg Jordan wrote for the Telegraph. BFRO founder Matt Moneymaker said, "The reporting she obtained sounds very much like real Sasquatch. The best clue is that the couple hears another one answering the howl with a very similar howl from the opposite direction." Another odd occurrence happened back in 2011 or 2012, Morrison said. Her brother and her son saw what looked like a man in a gorilla suit running across the road in front of them around midnight. In 2022, Eric Pennington was hiking on Glade Mountain east of Marion to his hunting spot on the first day of black powder season. Here's what he told me. "Had the moon not been 3/4 full, I wouldn't have seen it. I thought at first it was a hunter. It was a dark mass, and then I thought I was walking up on a bear. Soon the shape that was horizontal across the trail became vertical and very tall. Eric is 6'3" and weighs 230 pounds, and he said the shape is much taller and more broad than I am. I could make out that it was on 2 legs. He said it walked about 20 yards down the path and turned left, going uphill, out of sight. It moved a long distance very quickly. I would have to jog or run to cover that distance. I cannot believe something that size could move without noise. A bear makes a hell of a noise leaving, and it will run downhill." After considering going home, he walked on toward his stand and came to the point where the creature turned left. From a rhododendron thicket above the trail came what he described as a sound like someone clearing their throat for 6 or 8 seconds. Never much interested in Bigfoot, he used to poke fun at his wife for watching television shows about the creatures. But he said, it has made this skeptic rethink what is possible. 2 weeks ago, I would have laughed. I'm not saying I'm a believer. I can't explain it. Legal folks say witness testimony is the least reliable source of evidence. But research on eyewitness reports found that eyewitness memory is not intrinsically unreliable. If properly tested, it is typically highly reliable, and the human susceptibility to false memory formation has likely been exaggerated. In aggregate, they said, eyewitness Bigfoot reports show signs of consistency across reporters, potentially suggesting reliability. Consistency across reporters is what Dr. Henry Fehrenbach in the white shirt also found. The data are indicative of a sizable population of a species that has adapted in a variety of ways to the demands of surviving in the mountains of North America. As a serious hobby, immunologist Dr. Gary Nolan searches for answers to unexplained aerial phenomena that the U.S. Department of Defense has revealed and admitted to treating as a national security concern. For him, anecdotes are to be considered preliminary data that are to be followed potentially by a paradigm shift. More on this point in a bit. Sasquatch footprints are probably the most common. I don't know if you can see those. I have two examples of casts over there. Probably the most common evidence found and reported. Dr. Grover Krantz said, tracks are as valid a form of trace evidence as are fossils. And it was tracks that brought Bigfoot into larger public awareness and gave it that name. One of the earliest photographs of the track was made in California in 1947. But the Bigfoot phenomenon caught fire after Jerry Crew found footprints around his road building equipment near Bluff Creek, California. On August 27, 1958, as Matt Pruitt writes, Crew arrived at the work site to find several man-like tracks near his bulldozer. These tracks measured 16 inches long and 7 inches wide at the ball of the foot. The heels were approximately 5 inches wide, and the track maker had a stride of over 4 feet. A member of the road building crew, before they quit their jobs out of fear, gave the track maker a name, Bigfoot, which subsequently morphed into a single word. Journalist turned researcher John Green wrote, if that person had known that he was providing a common name for a whole species of animal, he might have given a little more thought to it. Coleman disagrees with the origin of the name Bigfoot. After Jerry Crew appeared at a newspaper office with a plaster cast of a large footprint, newspaper editor Andrew Genzoli coined the term Bigfoot and published the story on October 5th, 1958. However, there's good evidence that some of the tracks were hoaxed. Ivan Sanderson explored the case extensively and wrote, the important question is, of course, does it matter that the original 1958 Bigfoot incidents may have been to some extent based on a prank? While a prank may have occurred, good Bigfoot evidence is abundant. In fact, authentic tracks were later found in that same area. Much later, in April 2000, Bill Hiker, a wildlife biologist at the Colorado Division of Wildlife, evaluated tracks found by fly fishing. He told the Denver Post that the tracks were not fake and were not made by a bear. It's no animal we know of. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, the Idaho State University professor and expert in the structure and function of feet and bipedal creatures like us, points to a telling feature of Bigfoot tracks and therefore of their maker. Meldrum examined 40 discernible footprints that indicated a foot that lacks a fixed longitudinal arch like ours, but instead exhibits a high degree of midfoot flexibility in the middle, where our flexibility is right here, and that's leverage, a fulcrum and leverage that propels us to the next step. Bigfoot tracks suggest that there is what's considered a mid-tarsal break, a joint further back in the middle of the foot, and so the foot hinges like this, giving the whole 4 foot, having it in a position to kick off and propel the next step. The Sasquatch also appeared to have a compliant gait. Some of us are old enough to remember Groucho Marx. Remember that walk that he always had with his cigar? That's the kind of gait. Bent knees, slightly bent at the waist. The knees are never locked, and it's moving on a flat, flexible foot. Dr. Meldrum says this would be an efficient strategy for negotiating steep terrain, especially for a bipedal hominoid of considerable body mass. Bigfoots are said to weigh 600, 700, 800 pounds in some cases. Police investigator Jimmy Chilcutt, who was a Bigfoot skeptic, but he specializes in footprints and fingerprints and says a footprint found in 1987 convinced him that Bigfoot is real. The ridge flow pattern and the texture was completely different from anything I've seen. It certainly wasn't human and of no known primate that I've examined. And we have more trace evidence than footprints. A team of BFRO investigators organized by Matt Moneymaker went to a muddy place at Schuylkill Meadow in Skamania County, Washington. They left locally grown apples, hoping Bigfoot would get them and leave impressions in the mud. Somewhat to their surprise, as Coleman wrote, the next day half the apples were gone and the team found to be a half-body print. It took 325 pounds of plaster to cast the print. The Bigfoot folks were stunned to realize they had a good cast of a Sasquatch butt, ankles, testicles, hip, thigh, left arm, and apparent hair on the body. They believe the impression was made as the creature sat down and reached over to pick up the bait. Meldrum said the imprint seems to have been made by a large hair-covered hominoid, noting markings that looked like human dermal patterns or ridges like fingerprints that were on the heel print. Ever conservative, he said, all we're trying to say at this stage is that there's evidence that justifies objective consideration. So where did Bigfoot, Sasquatch, wood apes come from? The BFRO supports the Bigfoot Gigantopithecus hypothesis that suggests Bigfoots are surviving relatives of the genus Gigantopithecus, the Latin word for giant ape, a huge extinct cousin of the orangutan. One issue with that idea, though, is whether Giganta walked upright. The design of the jaw that was found in southern China and its inferred attachment to the skull indicates to some physical anthropologists that Giganta walked upright. Dr. Meldrum suggests Bigfoot gradually expanded its habitat from Asia into North America across Beringia, as did many species. Beringia is also called the Bering Land Bridge, which is misleading. At 620,000 square miles, it was twice the size of Texas. Animals and early humans who would populate North America had no notion they were entering a new continent. Bigfoot size could be due to Bergman's rule that holds species tend to be larger the farther north they are. That's why there are no moose in Mississippi. And Bigfoot found in the south are described as tall but slim, unlike the barrel-bodied ones farther north. Bigfoot's bipedalism, if its Asian ancestor was not already bipedal, could be an adaptation to its mountainous environment. However, Meldrum is cautious in all this. He said, although it is certainly tempting to connect the dots, this can only be suggested in a qualified manner based on the incomplete evidence at hand of Sasquatch of the natural history of Gigantopithecus. Nevertheless, the possibility is certainly sound, and the plausibility is quite reasoned. We've heard Brian and Sabrina's Bigfoot over in West Virginia. How does that sound similar to other Bigfoot sounds? Bigfoot is said to make sounds of a range higher and lower and at a volume that are beyond the range of human vocal capability and often in the same call, a quality that points to a vocal tract much different from ours. People commonly report feeling the vibration of their howls and roars. This first recording was made by a trucker at a rest stop on Highway 97 in Washington. He is not a Bigfoot personality, appears to have nothing to gain from this, and the recording is thought to be legitimate.
Absolute fuck is it? Starting to regret that I slept with this for a second. And they say Bigfoot isn't real?
I don't want to show of hands, but I know some of y'all sleeping with the lights on tonight.
What year was that?
That was, I don't have a year, it's been a few years. The next recording was captured in Kentucky and is held as authentic by Charlie Raymond of the Kentucky Bigfoot Research Organization. Interestingly, these people were trying to record ghosts. They were doing a paranormal search. Put their recorder in the windowsill of this house. And from up the ridge beside the house, we got those sounds. The next sound is famously known as the Ohio Howl, recorded by Matt Moneymaker in 1994 in Ohio near the West Virginia border. I may be the one sleeping with the lights on tonight. Finally, for comparison, is a wolf howl. Note the lack of resonance, the relatively thin quality of the sound compared to what we've heard. Those other sounds sound like they came out of big animals. Like tree knocks, rock clacks, oh wait, I'm ahead of myself. Not all sounds attributed to Bigfoot are vocal. Tree knocks are sounds that are like that of a stick hitting a tree. The sounds sometimes follow knocks made by researchers trying to elicit responses. Some have heard knocks seemingly responding to other Bigfoot knocks. This recording was made by Charlie Raymond in Kentucky. That is very faint. Rock clacks, like tree knocks, are sounds from an unseen source. We'll hear shortly about rocks that look to have been knocked together in what appears to be a Bigfoot nest. But first, on this one, we'll hear the investigator's clack followed by what seems to be a response. Lots of people report finding structures made of broken tree limbs. Rick Rellis has observed these in numerous locations and sees consistency in their forms, and sometimes symmetry, where every stick is broken to the same length. Many structures are, in fact, windfalls or down by wind or snow load that landed in geometric patterns. But many defy that explanation and are found where people are absent, where hunters are not building blinds and Boy Scouts aren't building shelters. Rellis says where he finds numerous structures close together, he observes nighttime activity, like sounds of walking, tree knocks, other sounds, and structures that he's seen are usually taken down in a few months. They're temporary. Their meaning, whether for us or other Bigfoots, is unknown, just like rock clacks and tree knocks and howls. Glyphs are smaller arrangements of sticks or rocks thought to be a form of communication. I photographed this one on the way back down a logging road after Rick Rellis had played his harmonica where we stopped for a time back up the mountain. In the middle of the dark, this was 10 o'clock at night probably. In the middle of the road, as we came back down, was a figure made of a freshly broken and split stick, lying with the bright interwood facing up as though to be visible. It was not there when we went up. We walked up 4 abreast, ditch to ditch. We would have seen that. If Bigfoot left that sign for us, we couldn't decide if it meant they enjoyed the music or not. What else do Bigfoot do with sticks and stones? They apparently throw them. Fishermen often report rocks splashing in the water near them and they can't find the thrower. There's no other people around, no other cars in the parking lot. Campers hear pebbles hitting tents and campers. After an investigation Sarah and I were on, our group was standing around our vehicles when a whapping sound came through the tree leaves behind us, followed by a stick landing among us. We didn't get the message to leave, and a few minutes later, a heavy, resounding whack sounded just beyond the gate across the road we had just walked. We jumped in the vehicles and left. While these are valid experiences, they do not stand in themselves as proof that Bigfoot exists. There is correlation in many instances with multiple forms of evidence happening together. And that's important, but it's not proof of causation. We cannot say Bigfoot did those things because we did not see Bigfoot make the tracks, or howl, or bite a tree, or throw a stick, or rocks. But collectively, it all points to and in no way contradicts primate behavior. Hair thought to have come from Bigfoot have been found numerous times. The samples, when examined microscopically, are found in more than 99% of cases to have come from deer, horses, cattle, humans, bears, on and on, anything with hair. That small remainder came back as unidentified. The outer sheath of these hair shafts show patterns similar to human hair, but they conspicuously lack a medulla, the keratin in the center of the shaft. The shaft is hollow, doesn't have the keratin pith, as it's been called. Anthropologist Dr. Carlton S. Kuhn reported hair that he described as that of a previously unknown primate as compared to his hair samples for most of the living primates of the world. Its scale pattern is primate, its pigment dense and black like that of a lowland gorilla, and its internal structure unusual. He said, on this evidence, we may be justified to state that a primate other than man exists in the woods. The best, if still controversial, evidence for Bigfoot comes from October 20, 1967, when Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin made in Bluff Creek, Northern California, what Lauren Coleman called the Zapruder film of cryptozoology. Patty, from Patterson's last name, is the subject in the film and made famous, and while she remains controversial, she has never been shown to be a man in a monkey suit, as critics typically dismiss it. And in 1967, this is before CGI, this is before AI, certainly. So the only option is fakery through costuming. And it just can't be done. I couldn't then, and barely can now. Dr. Melbourne has said he is as sure of Patty's reality as had he been there that day. He points to the upward flexion of the toes as she takes a step. Lots of people think the Patterson-Gimlin film is grainy and scratchy and you can't see anything on it. It's actually a top quality, if not the top quality, film stock for that period of time. Retains very good resolution. And so the problem comes after multiple copies have been made. Each copy loses something. But when you can go back to a second, a third generation copy and digitize that and clean it up without adding things, and you get to see lots of details that people think are just simply not there. But we don't walk that way, and that's a movement. in the toes that it was not possible to fake in costumes in 1967. Others have noted Patty behaves as most sighted wood apes do. She puts distance between herself and the observer. Another person said, if you're going to fake an encounter with a big hairy being in the woods, is your story not going to go along the lines of had teeth this long and claws this long and it was almost on me? Never features of Bigfoot encounter stories. They just see the observer and walk away. Sometimes they run, usually and they don't have to run because at 4.5, 5 foot strides, they can just take steps and cover ground. An artist, a former machinist for a helicopter manufacturer and computer scientist who goes by Thinker Thunker online, developed the idea of pDNA, or proportional DNA, that says every species has a unique ratio of arm, leg, and torso length. Our legs are longer than our torso and arms. This is us. He calls us the red team. But all of the Patty and all of the known Sasquatches, the arms, legs, and torso fall out. And we tried to capture that in this creature over here. In fact, we made sure that the legs, the torso, and arms were the same length. Okay, next video, we'll watch for that, the proportions. They're just not human. People say, well, that's someone in a suit with an arm extension, but it's pointed out if there's an inflexible extension, the elbow is not going to be in the middle of the arm anymore. Coleman wrote most Bigfoot experts, including John Green, Jeff Meldren, as well as Renee DeHenden and Grover Krantz, hold that the film is valid footage of an unknown primate. A $75,000 study by the North American Science Institute concluded Patterson, his film Bigfoot is authentic, and the creature's skin and musculature are what one would expect to find in a living animal. Researcher Dmitry Bayanov reported all attempts by debunkers by means of films and videos showing a man in an ape costume have failed. The actors show wrong biomechanics, wrong movements, wrong gait and anatomy, all of which are quite different from what is characteristic and looks natural in Patterson's film subject. Bill Munn's, a veteran of Hollywood special effects and costuming, including that of the Swamp Thing, extensively studied and wrote about Patty and the complete absence of numerous and unavoidable giveaways that are apparent in costuming people as animals. There's way too many points to go into, but like you can see there where we have tried to put fur over contours, nobody would accuse that of being alive. Nobody's going to run out of here thinking that's going to get them. And you find the same thing. Fabric behaves in a certain way that skin does not, and it gives itself away that way. Planet of the Apes came out in the same year the Patterson-Gimlin film did, which means it was in production before Patty was filmed. And those are some unconvincing costumes and faces in a high-budget production. And nearly a decade later, Chewbacca looked like his actor Peter Mayhew in furry pajamas. George Lucas would have done better if he could have. We have seen that wood apes behave like other apes, some of which fish termites out of mounds with a thin stick, which is tool use, and that's rare among animals. Regarding Bigfoot, Peter Byrne wrote, as to tools and the possibility of the creatures having them and using them, we have no credible evidence. However, we will see momentarily a nut-crushing station reported by researchers in Oklahoma long after Peter Byrne's writing. Environmental DNA, or eDNA, is genetic material left behind by materials by animals in the environment. Analysis of the samples generates a snapshot of whatever animals were living in the area. In 2020, members of the Travel Channel's TV show Expedition Bigfoot found non-human primate DNA. The team collected soil samples from under a supposed Bigfoot structure and sent them to the UCLA California Environmental DNA Program for analysis. According to the eDNA project manager, analysis of the sample indicated a primate other than humans was in the area. 3,000 samples indicated the chimpanzee genus. That's not to say Bigfoot is a chimpanzee, but it was primate, and the closest thing that it resembled was chimpanzee. So let's look at some other science by professionals and lay people. Project Zoo Book's mission is making the subject of Sasquatch less taboo by approaching the study of unrecognized animals from a scientific perspective and removing the professional stigma surrounding discussions of cryptozoology. The group meets online every quarter and includes Amy View, co-founder and group spokesman, 3 primatologists, a veterinarian, a fisheries biologist, another biologist, and retired law enforcement officer, 2 taxonomists, a psychology professor, a herpetologist and filmmaker, a naturalist, an acoustician, an infrared specialist, and a cinematographer, as well as several field researchers. The Olympic Project is an association of dedicated researchers, investigators, biologists, and trackers committed to documenting the existence of Sasquatch through science and education. Through comprehensive habitat study and data collection, their goal is to obtain as much information and empirical evidence as they can, with hopes of being prepared with a database to share when and if the species is classified. What became their study area on Washington's Olympic Peninsula was found in 2015 by a timber surveyor who came across nests unlike those of bears but like those of gorillas, but only more elaborately built. The nests were way off trails in the area and 2.5 miles behind the lock gate, and the surveyor was weirded out, said Shane Corson, a field researcher with the project. Derek Randalls, who later co-founded the project, went with the surveyor and the Department of Natural Resources official back to the nest area and found 5 nests. Corson said no one had ever seen anything like that. 5 nests were found, and the count a couple of weeks ago stood at 24. We heard him at a conference in Gatlinburg last month. 24, all strategically placed on fingers coming off ridges. They had an Army veteran go in and take a look at these nests with him, and as soon as he saw them, he said, wow, this is strategic. He recognized the positions so that there was avenues of escape as well as fields of view to reconnoiter the surrounding area. He said if you were in the Army and going to set up a bivouac, that's the way you would do it. All of the nests were made of huckleberry branches and were at least 1 foot deep. Some were 8 feet long. The sticks were peeled, twisted, and snapped off with no tooth or claw marks. They were not made by bears that bite sticks off. Sticks can be found that were broken a distance away, up to 9 feet high, and transported. That's not bear behavior. Scat is found in these nests, but not in bear nests. I kind of wish it was the other way around, don't you? Huckleberry bushes can be 9 feet tall, like a wall, and the nests are located behind them. Dr. Melbourne visited the site and found that the sticks were pushed into the ground, forming a rim around the nest. Corson and the team have observed the nests are built at the end of February. Going back to sounds and rock clacking, at one nest was found a pair of rocks bearing marks like those made by clacking stones together. So apparently they sit at their nests and communicate either with each other, short distance or longer distance. The Bigfoot Mapping Project was created by Scott Tompkins, who has a degree in GIS from State University of New York and over 14 years of field GIS experience. Tompkins wrote that the project was created to introduce technology that has not yet been incorporated into Bigfoot field research. Among its maps is one showing Bigfoot reports closely aligned with black bear habitat, a fact skeptics sometimes use to support their idea that Bigfoot are just mistaken bears. That's a bit insulting for anyone familiar with wildlife, but from an ecological standpoint, it stands to reason that these areas provide Bigfoot the same abundant food, water, and cover, also favored by bears, wolverines, and bobcats. The mission of the North American Wood-Ape Conservancy is to facilitate official recognition and conservation of what it believes is a rare, unlisted North American anthropoid species. Pursuant to those objectives, the organization has focused its time and resources in the remote part of Oklahoma. It was here that researchers found what they interpret as a nut crushing station used by wood apes, perhaps the first documentation of Bigfoot tool use. It's certainly the first that I know of. In his 229-page monograph, and I have a copy if anyone would like to see it, we read, in the wake of 4 years and thousands of hours of persistent and often grueling fieldwork, the Conservancy concludes that a novel or relic species of anthropoid resides in the study area. The species is represented by a small troop of animals, several of which have been repeatedly observed, and the troop is evidently producing young. And a milestone DNA study is happening at North Carolina State University in Raleigh. This is big. Barney Fife used to say, "This is big, this is really big." This project's organized by Darby Orcutt. He's a librarian, but he has training in ways to integrate the different sciences and communicate between different fields and communicate findings to the public. So he is perfect to set this up. It's informally called the Bigfoot Hair DNA Project among those of us that are really excited about it. But formally, it's the university's DNA study of anomalous biological samples. It's part of a wider program to collect evidence and data on several major anomalies that have long been marginalized. In other words, they're trying to bring the spotlight of science into this murky subject. And what's big is it's backed by an institution. Top-level scientists are already participating from various fields, and they are willing to publish any results they determine from the evidence. So, why then, in light of all the evidence we've considered and the good work collecting it, is Bigfoot not already recognized by science as a new species? Remember when Matt Pruitt referred to the ossified paradigm that doesn't allow for the possibility that the Sasquatch might exist? Even when gorillas were classified after much resistance to taking the local people's accounts seriously, the scientific paradigm couldn't consider that maybe a great ape lived in North America. The paradigm could not examine the consistently reported similarities between Bigfoot and the other apes, such as eating fish. Bigfoot is considered merely an anomaly, not to be bothered with. But in truth, that's the starting point. Philosopher of science Thomas Kuhn said, discovery commences with the awareness of an anomaly. It then continues with exploration of the anomaly, and it closes only when the paradigm has been adjusted. Awareness of the Sasquatch anomaly in North America began with Aboriginal accounts and continued with the earliest published wildland reports. Settlers and pioneers familiar with normal wildlife species became aware that they had observed an anomaly in the form of a real but unusual animal. Such observations continued with recent eyewitness accounts of the same species, often corroborated by photographs and casts of its tracks. So we are far into Kuhn's extended exploration. As Bendernagel wrote, with over 3,000 reports of Sasquatches, it is a greater number now. Or their tracks on file, what was perceived as the anomalous has become the expected. But it is expected only for the few scientists who have familiarized themselves with the data and with the trace and physical evidence of a North American ape, that observed anatomies and behaviors are largely consistent with those of known apes. As Bendernagel observed, the final stage of Kuhn's discovery process in which the paradigm is adjusted has not yet occurred, although signs of a realignment of thought are beginning to appear. Only occasionally does a great upheaval take place, he said. Scientists then have to adapt to an entirely new way of perceiving their objects of study, and they have some explaining to do. Sasquatch would represent a large mammal that has persisted into the present without being officially recognized by the scientific establishment, and it wouldn't be the first time. Peterborough noted that in 1957, during a regular air patrol, federal wildlife officers flying over a remote part of Wood Buffalo National Park, Alberta, spotted an isolated herd of 200 wood bison that had gone completely unnoticed for decades. So to wrap, this is Jeff Meldon's position, and I have taken it as my own. He said, from a scientific standpoint, a respectable portion of the evidence suggests, in an independent yet highly correlated matter, the existence of an unrecognized ape. This conclusion of necessity remains tentative and provisional, since the interpretation of evidence, however persuasive it may be at this point, remains ultimately inconclusive. Meldon's final thoughts point to this. It now seems more incredible to suggest this matter could all be dismissed as mere stories, misidentifications, and spurious hoaxes than it is to at least rationally entertain the well-founded suggestion that the legend of Sasquatch possibly has its basis in a real animal and may eventually prove to be among the most astounding zoological discoveries ever. Because something is making those tracks. I mean, plain sight. Good, didn't work. I'll take questions in just a moment. I want to first say Dan Scott of Artistic Kindling. He does incredible wood inlay work. He has some examples of his work, and each sale will represent a donation to the museum, so step over and check those out. Who has questions or reports they would like to share, or if you have reports that you would like to give me confidentially, we can do that afterwards. Yes, sir.
Have you ever seen Bigfoot?
Have I seen one? No. I'd love to. Closest we've come is having a stick thrown at us.
In my mind, Bigfoot's male. Have you found a female?
Yeah, like Patty. She was, I don't want to be crude, but she was obviously female.
About little pigs,
About what?
babies.
Babies are reported. I've heard reports of babes in arms being carried like we carry babies to toddlers. Yes, sir.
Have there been reports from other cultures like Nepal or China or Siberia?
I think the only countries that do not have accounts of Bigfoot are places around Finland, Scandinavia, in that area. Nepal certainly has the Yeti. Australia has the Yowie. China has the Yeren. Just about everybody has an account of something like that. Yes, sir.
What was your introduction to Bigfoot? I know you said, back in like 3rd grade or something like that.
Do you remember the scholastic book sales that we used to have in school?
Sure.
At one of those, I bought a book about myths and monsters. I don't remember the title, but there were several chapters, and it seems like maybe it was chapter 8, page 60-something in the back, because I'd always get tense when I got there, because on the first page of that chapter, there was a sketch of Patty. Sarah's got the typical rightward facing silhouette and that famous look in the back at Roger Patterson. And then the sketch scared me. The hair standing up on my arms now just thinking about that. And I would hurry past that page when I was in that book. Well, I didn't do anything about it for years, but then when the internet came along, I happened to think, well, I wonder what there is about this Bigfoot. I found the BFRO and all of its reports, and there were reports close to where I grew up and all over the country, 3,000 and some. Now, there's more than that. But they call it a rabbit hole. once you get in it, and you think you understand something, you realize you have more questions. And all the time, you're trying to stay on the straight and narrow parsimony path. And that's why I haven't talked about woo, and there are folks that see a connection between UFOs and Bigfoot. They've seen Bigfoot piloting UFOs, they've seen them come out of UFOs, they've seen Bigfoot go into portals and come out. They've seen Bigfoot just disappear like a cloak without Harry Potter's magic cake, they just vanish. That one to me might have some credence, because if you think about the hollow hair shaft, they're translucent. And it is possible that if they let their hair stand up like mine did a moment ago, perhaps that catches colors, the foliage behind them, and lets them blend in. I don't expect for a minute that they actually disappear. But I saw a buck, he's a seven or 9 point, it's an odd number, buck in our yard recently. We've seen him several times, and once I was below my garage and there he stood. And I looked down to get my camera and looked back up about that long, and he was gone. The effect was he had just vanished. But I know that he went forward into the brush at the edge of the yard. So you take any organism that is supremely adapted to its environment, they can do what seemed to us some pretty amazing things. Yes.
I've heard of independent investigators that have some pretty sophisticated equipment on board their vehicles to actually look for any evidence of Sasquatch. Can you speak to any of that equipment?
You can go from just your eyes and ears to binoculars to thermal sensors, can pick up heat, infrared. You can use parabolic microphones. If you had the money, you could use radar. I'd love to see that installation, especially if it's portable, to where you could see something. People are starting to use drones now. Moneymaker that I mentioned, he's a big proponent of using drones. I see that as limited in effectiveness, because Bigfoot's going to learn what that sound is, and they're going to see us standing there and putting one in the air, and they're going to say, "Oh, that's those guys again. I'm just going to get away." But yeah, you can spend nothing to thousands of dollars on all kinds of equipment, sensing equipment.
Do you think the only way they're gonna ever prove if you want to build one?
Science dictates so. I hate to talk about it, but that's the only way science is going to fully get on board, is if they've got a body or partial body.
Which is what happened with the gorilla one, that they finally got.
Yeah, they have to bring one in, or at least one.
The sighting at the boat dock at Hungry Mother's State Park used to be on the BFRO. You know, you can go by state and county and see if there have been any sightings, but I haven't seen it on there recently. Was it taken down, and if so, why? If you know.
There are, well, not every occurrence, not every encounter gets entered into the database. Some are, they're just too questionable. The ones that you see are taken from the public and vetted. A researcher calls them up and uses some investigative techniques, and if the story meets muster, then they get published on the report. Private investigations like that are a little bit outside what the BFR database is for. And I think you're right. I think it should be, because you've got vetted researchers. You've got 3 seeing the same thing. So it would add validity to the whole thing if it were. I agree with you.
Did you have, Eric's thing at Pew Mountain reported at the BFRO?
It is. It is one of, I believe, 2 reports from Smith County. The other was from Chilhowie. A couple sitting on their porch saw, I don't know, was it Dry Fork. Saw a deer run across the road, and then just after that, a creature they hadn't noticed, but it was crouching by the side of the road. It stood up and followed the deer. It's in the BFR database. It was, yes.
Do you believe that the evidences for Bigfoot extend validation to the existence of other cryptofauna such as the skunk ape, mothman, or the swamp? Like, do you believe that since there is so much evidence here that others should also look into those creatures more seriously?
I think whenever, they call it ethnology, whenever a group of people is talking about something and they don't have anything to gain, they're not suddenly showing up on YouTube with enough viewers to quit their job, or they're not going on TV. If they're legitimate, I think they should be paid attention to. Because there's a lot of things that we know now that we wouldn't have if we hadn't gone out and said, well, go take a look. Somebody saw a funny fish up in Laurel Bed Lake. I'm gonna go look, see if it's there. And maybe there's an invasive species that's come in.
Do you think there's any correlation between missing people in the state and national forest and Bigfoot?
I'm sorry, correlation between.
People missing.
4 letters.
It's kind of like the black bear and Bigfoot overlay. You can also overlay missing people. You can overlay limestone cave systems, and they all match up. I don't know about that. I think there's more research to be done. I do think it's an interesting case if you remember the 3-year-old boy that got separated from his parents in North Carolina, and said a bear had taken care of him for 3 days.
February.
In February,
Yeah.
yeah. I'd love to meet that bear,
Yeah,
because it needs to be studied.
it does. It really does.
Yes, sir.
I was gonna say about things disappearing, most of you know where they did the new road out Express Gravel. I live in right in the middle of it. My granddaughter was business, and she'd walk her dog at night. I told her there's a bear here. One morning I was taking her to breakfast. We pulled up to start the town, there was a bear to our left. And anybody's been out through there knows there's almost no vegetation. There was a bush. That bear went up and in that bush and stopped, and you could not see
How
him.
about that?
My daughter got a picture of it just before it went in the bush, and you could not see that bear in that bush.
Hmm.
So beware, and they are a lot of them around here.
Well, you know, if you walk through Hungry Mother Park or Blade Mountain, any of these mountains around here, the rhododendron is so thick from the edge of the road, that could be sitting 5 feet back in there, and you wouldn't know it,
Yep.
unless it
We
clearly
drove
slowed.
up, just pushed the thing, oh, and you couldn't tell that bear was in that bush. And my granddaughter took a picture of it, going into the bush.
Going in, okay. Yes, sir.
This is a little close to home. I was born and raised in Commonwealth, just over the mountain here. And we had a 100-acre farm. And this was about 1954, 55. I was just a kid. My brother was coming from a little country store. And bird tobacco at that time was about 6 feet high. He said he looked over in the back of the patch and said something was built with the bird tobacco was head about that big and black. And started walking like a 45 angle through the tobacco patch with a 58 went down through here. And he said, I took off running, I never looked back. And I asked him about a year before he got passed away in 2012. And he said, I never will forget it. He said, I never like it yesterday. It scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
And then my brother was hunting up on the mountain, 'cause we had a farm. Our farm went from the middle 58 to the top of the mountain was 1 mile. So we was hunting up there, and I was up there at 11. And you know how snow will melt off, and there'll be little patches here and there. We was on top of the mountain, and we came up on this track in the snow. It was about that long and looked like a human footprint. Just that little thing snow. And I asked him, what is that? He's about 20 years older than me. He said, I have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
So, and then something used to scream. I was real small. Something used to scream. You'd hear it now and then, and the dogs would go on the floor. They would
Yeah.
But who's to say, I don't know.
That's a common thing. It seems like dogs' curiosity ends where a Sasquatch encounter begins. There are numerous stories of going back to the tent, going back home, not going any further.
Thank you, we got an appointment, you did a great job.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Oh, you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Is there a smell associated with Bigfoot?
You hear that a lot.
I read about it.
There's a smell associated with gorillas, and it seems to be a defensive tactic. If you're bothering me, I go and back you off. And it seems possibly Sasquatches can do that same thing because that's not noted in every encounter. And when it is, it's overpowering. People will talk about that more than the experience itself. Garbage, wet dog, wet horse, manure, just about as bad as you can imagine. And they seem to be able to turn it off.
That's actually one of the things that came up with conversations with people. You know, I had put out the pieces and had lots of people talk to me, and I'd never heard skunk ape.
Yeah.
And that's the name that's down in Florida, but that's one of the things is you're supposed to be able to smell it from far off, and I'd never heard that.
Yeah.
And then Appalachia, woods booger, which I'd never heard that name before either. So I keep collecting little bits and pieces and finding myself really interested.
Yeah, Yowie is another name. There's any group of people that you can define probably has its own name for it.
In terms of Bigfoot, whether or not you believe, I believe that you should be prepared if you go out hiking. You should at least, if you happen to see something, it is far better to be prepared to say, okay, this is what that might be, instead of not even considering it and then be shocked with it completely. Whether or not I believe, I'm not sure, but I must admit, there's something. There is something making those tracks.
Indeed there is. Yeah.
I was just thinking, I'm still impressed with that bird, the tool use, and that picture of the nut breakage using a stone, and it reminds me, I ran across it, as if y'all don't have enough to worry about now. But there has been a tribe, and I've been following this, of orangutans in Sri Lanka, and they are using spears to fish.
Wow.
And it's on YouTube, they're standing there in the river and getting their fish. And that is use of Stone Age technology. That's what our ancestors, how they started. So I dare say that the E word, evolution, but they haven't found another tribe that's like that. So, and buddy Bigfoot or Sasquatch, it's hard to tell, what little we have seen, what other things can they do? What other skills do they have?
Yeah.
So,
I'm surprised no one asked, every speaker gets this question, how come no bones have ever been found? Well, in this part of the country, pretty much anywhere that Bigfoot and black bear exists is some degree of temperate rainforest. It's moist, the soils are acidic, bones and remains don't last. The worms go in, worms go out, ants come along, microbes. I've seen time-lapse footage of I think it was a pig carcass left out, and within 3 weeks, you couldn't tell what had been there. There might be a few tufts of hair. If you were just walking by, you'd never know it was there. And so, they, I would suspect, go way back and beyond, up in the thickest parts, the highest parts, to die, like dogs and cats will try to get away with themselves. And studies have shown hunters statistically do not go more than a quarter mile off of a trail. And so you get beyond that, you get into the Bigfoot zone. We spent more time up there, so tell them what we hunt.
Other than the rock clicks and the wood knocks and the howls and some of the symbols, is there any evidence or any studies about how they communicate?
Other than those, there's a possibility that they use infrasound. There are people that experience odd sensations that could be explained by that. Tigers and lions will use that supposedly to confuse their prey long enough that they can pounce and catch it. Elephants use infrasound to communicate over miles, and so it's very possible that Sasquatch does the same thing.
One thing you didn't bring up, I was watching the show in Alaska, and they come across these trees where they've been broken off and stuck in the ground with a root ball in the air.
Yeah.
And they couldn't, this part of the continent, whatever, could do that powerful.
I, for some reason, removed that slide, but you remember I spoke with Rick Ellis, and those were his tree structures. Over next to Asheville, he said his best casting track, but he found several of those trees driven down in the ground. Now, timber crews will sometimes do that just for fun, but you get a big piece of timber equipment on a piece of ground, you're going to be able to tell what's there. And when you're looking at flat ground with a tree stuck in it, something else did that. Well, thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it. Thank you.